test ändra. Test ändra. Test ändra.
Hello, 1, 2, 3, test. Maybe, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear. Can you hear us?
Great, yes, we are here.
Can you see me?
Yes, perfectly fine, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else? I have Paul here. He's our technician. Come here, Paul. So, is there anything that we need to do when the time comes, or?
At this stage, no, just you will use this link that we provided you so that you
just
sign in.
Just answer the questions, it's Anya.
Unless you change the questions, Anya.
That's exactly what I'm going to do.
I'm not answering anything else, sorry. It's too late, it's gonna be past midnight.
I know, from our side, we are deeply sorry, but that's the time zone.
That's perfectly fine.
Stanford graduate can answer at 2 a.m., I'm sure. Come on, how many papers you have done at 2 a.m. and you were still fantastic. So I'm sure you can do it. We trust in you fully.
Sure, sure. I have prepared those 3 questions, no worries.
Okay. So Nebi, we promised the test. So this is the test. Can you hear me well? Is it too loud?
No, it's perfectly fine. I think, can you hear me well?
Yes, we see you well and we hear you even better.
Okay, that's great.
I'll take a photo.
So I will put a tie. I think I should, right?
It's up to you. I see a lot of men with ties, but it's not an obligation.
Just asking. Let me think about it.
Yeah, you can think about it. It's not mandatory.
Okay, all right.
Okay, great seeing you. Great that it functions. I hope it continues to function perfectly like now.
Perfect. So we are just joining at 4 p.m., right? Or we stay connected all the time?
Yes, you are joining at 4 p.m. But you can...
Okay.
But probably better to tune in earlier so that we still see, you know, if everything, the technical guy can check if everything is working well with you.
Okay,
also,
sounds good.
Ardita, watch the emails or Viber or whatever, because if we are delayed or something, she will be sending you heads up.
Perfect. Okay, Sanya. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, see you later. Bye.
Dear guests, good day, welcome. We'll be starting in a few minutes, so I'd kindly ask you to take your seats. If you cannot find a spot at the table, we have some extra chairs in the back that are also available. Thank you.
Здраво на сите, ве молам, земете ги вашите седечки позиции. Настанот ќе почне за 1 минута. Фала ви.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you in different parts of the world. I'm Narine Sahakian, the resident representative of UNDP in North Macedonia, and I'm really happy to have all of you with us today for the launch of our new Acceleration Lab and for a discussion on how quality of leadership matters most in these times of disruption and how we can apply a system transformation approach to development. Today's event is a hybrid event, meaning that it is happening both in a physical space here in this hall, but also on a virtual space on Zoom and on our live streams. Likewise, some of our speakers will join us today physically here in this stage, and some of them will join by Zoom, and you will be seeing them on the screen behind me. The pandemic may limit our opportunities and the ways how we organize and conduct our meetings physically, but definitely it also provides us with immense opportunity to attract global audience at the virtual spaces and also to attract globally renowned speakers that might have otherwise been not possible. And today's event is very much about that. It also helped us to secure our distinguished moderator for the opening session, who I have the great pleasure introducing. Ms. Mirjana Spoljaric-Eger, Assistant Administrator and Director of Regional Bureau for Europe and Central Asia. She is joining us virtually from her office in New York. Dear Mirjana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Narine. I hope you can hear me. And Prime Minister, Administrator, dear colleagues and friends, it is a great pleasure to see you all. And I must admit, I envy Narine, you and all colleagues who can sit together in a room and do not always have to connect virtually. So I hope we will see each other in person in the near future. Again, thank you for making the time and the effort to join us today. Today's event is a cornerstone of two important developments. It is the expansion of UNDP's innovation capacities at our North Macedonia office with the launch of the new Accelerator Lab. And we are celebrating today the opening of a high-level dialogue in the country on systems transformation through public policy making. Albert Einstein apparently once said that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And inspired by the same reasoning, UNDP is about to accomplish the world's largest and fastest learning network on sustainable development. The UNDP Accelerator Labs are a new service offering that works with people, governments, and the private sector to reimagine development cooperation in the 21st century. UNDP in Skopje, I'm proud to say, is now part of this network. But as I said as well, we are also here today to inspire a dialogue on how public policy can catalyze transformative change. Though there is clearly much to gain in terms of closing the fiscal gap, when it comes to what and how, things are less apparent. So we hope that our prominent speakers today will help us ask the right questions and perhaps even answer some of them. Today's event is structured in three parts. We will begin shortly with the opening remarks of our distinguished guests, Prime Minister Zoran Zaev and UNDP Administrator Achim Steiner. During the second part, we will have the pleasure of hearing stories of system transformation from the three keynote speakers who share a deep interest and personal involvement in transformational change. From Israel's economic miracle to Estonia's rapid digital transformation and the still unfolding concept of building forward better, we hope that you will find our guests' insights thought-provoking and inspiring at the same time. After the keynotes, we will conclude with a discussion among representatives from North Macedonia on what it takes to make transformative changes in the local context. And now, without further ado, allow me to welcome Administrator Achim Steiner. Achim, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mirjana. Thank you also, Nareen, and let me begin by first of all, extending my personal greetings to all of you in Skopje, North Macedonia, to thank His Excellency the Prime Minister for not only welcoming us as a partner in the country, but also with the UN family to be a partner to North Macedonia's thinking about its own future, the development pathways that lie ahead. And to do so today on an occasion when we are particularly excited and proud to join you because it is the launch of the North Macedonia Accelerator Lab. As many of you may have also wondered, this is a very challenging time for all of you and for the whole world, as we are still in the midst of a pandemic, and a pandemic that is leaving deep scars on our societies, in our families and in our communities. And sometimes it is difficult to imagine a future when you have so many challenges right ahead of you and all around us. But as we just discussed with Prime Minister Zaev when we were speaking before the beginning of this meeting, maybe this is precisely the moment where introducing the Accelerator Lab in North Macedonia as part of what UNDP and the UN family can bring to your country as it looks to the future, as it seeks to explore, identify, invest, and drive development, is perhaps the best moment one could do that, because what we need right now is ideas, we need boldness, we need experimentation, we need to take risks, and we need to embrace the future rather than trying to, as many have said right now, not just go back to where we were before. We meet at a time that is challenging, but we meet also in the context of a history, a culture, and a diaspora of North Macedonians that has really become part of the spectrum of possibility that now defines what your nation and its people can look forward to. As head of UNDP, I have spent the last 12 months watching, observing, listening very carefully with the many teams that we have working across the world in 170 countries, what it is that helps societies, first of all, to respond to COVID-19 more effectively or less effectively? What defines resilience in terms of the ability to recognize how serious a threat this pandemic has become, but also to recognize how societies think forward? We are in the midst of crisis management, but in every crisis lies an opportunity, and in every crisis lies also the beginnings of a way forward. We meet today really as a community of development practitioners, but practitioners that also have to recognize that in the way that we look at the future of development worldwide, in any country, in any context, in any economy, has to recognize that there are issues that relate to the fundamentals of what defines a happy society, a society where opportunity dominates and not legacy dominates, where the ability to bring fresh perspectives, introduce new opportunities, leverage the horizon of technology also, digitalization that is knocking on the door of virtually everything we do today in our everyday lives, has become ubiquitous. And yet we know that it is not just gadgets, it's not just the next app that will define success. It is embedded in a broader, a whole of society approach and a more systemic approach to development. So as we take, for example, the frontiers of digitalization, UNDP has learned just with its Accelerator Lab network in the last 12 months how powerful the leveraging of technology can be. We, for example, introduced together with the Rwandan government robots in health centers and clinics in order to help with the testing and tracing of COVID patients, to reduce the exposure of health staff to actually being infected by COVID-19. We have established trading platforms in markets in different African countries where traders who essentially were overnight prevented from being able to trade their produce and therefore their livelihood because they live with income from one day to the next, by introducing essentially the equivalent of an Uber platform that allowed farmers, traders, and consumers in bigger cities to connect and to maintain, let's say, an emergency economy that could use digital platforms to trade. And we all know that as the pandemic recedes, these innovations, these new frontiers and platforms will not disappear. On the contrary, they represent a new platform on which we can move forward. Pay in advance platforms, cash transfer platforms, but also the ability to test, track, and trace. We have seen in almost 140 countries over the last 12 months, literally hundreds of new applications and experiments emerge, in which UNDP has learned, I think, in 12 months more than in the last 12 years about how central technology can be, but also how important it is to establish an ecosystem within which these technologies can thrive to the benefit of society. And that is what the Accelerator Labs are meant to be, both an asset and a different lens on the opportunities within a country, but connected to a global network that is now working with Accelerator Labs in 115 countries. It allows us to study more closely where is it that the startup culture, the entrepreneurial dimension, but also local government, national regulatory frameworks, the financing and commercial aspects of a new frontier in development need to be curated. The lesson that we have learned, and my dear colleague Abdullah Mardai will speak in a moment also to the lessons that we have drawn from the over 130 socioeconomic assessments and recovery plans that UNDP, together with the UN development system and agencies across the world, has undertaken over the last 6 to 12 months, have taught us that governance, the regulatory environment, the incentives, the policies, but also the financing and fiscal policies are fundamental to how we can drive innovation. Accelerator Labs are a celebration of the human spirit, of innovation, of creativity, but we are not naive. And I'm sure Saul and also Tao will speak in a moment to the fact that innovation is not an end in itself. Technology is not an end in itself. It becomes meaningful, transformative, and effective when it actually contributes to a larger vision of development. And I want to end by thanking the Prime Minister once more for having had the trust and confidence in our UN family, in the agencies, funds and programs that work with you in North Macedonia, together with our resident coordinator, and UNDP with its team to be a partner in the new National Development Strategy. There is perhaps no more important moment and no more important National Development Strategy than this one that you are currently framing and then will implement, because it will come as a bridge between the dark moment of the pandemic and the opportunity of what follows from this pandemic. And Mariana began by quoting Albert Einstein, and I think he's perhaps somebody who has always taught us that on the one hand, if we try to solve the problems with the same solutions that we have had before, we will not get very far. But Albert Einstein also was a deep and convinced optimist, both believing in human ingenuity, but also in that sense of responsibility that comes along with the power to create. And it is in that spirit that I hope that the Accelerator Lab that now becomes part of the UNDP offering, both to North Macedonia as a country, but also to connect us with our UN sister agencies and to a global network of innovation, experimentation, and learning, that we will make a valuable contribution to what happens next in your country, in your community. In that sense, we also consider it a privilege to be part of this journey, because as we may bring something, we will also take lessons, experiences, successes into our global network. And that is what makes UNDP both an integrator and a global connector. In that spirit, Prime Minister, distinguished guests, dear friends and colleagues, thank you so much for making this occasion today a special one. And let's make this Accelerator Lab a success for North Macedonia and the people it is meant to serve. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Achim. And allow me to quote you after I've quoted, or we have both quoted Einstein. You said in your opening statement that we want, as UNDP, create an environment where opportunity dominates and not legacy. And I think this is extremely important. And this is how we want to continue engaging with the government of North Macedonia and with all our partners in the country and beyond. Looking at the future, especially important now as we want to get out of the situation of compound crisis and create opportunities, especially for the young and of tomorrow's generations. I would now like to turn to Prime Minister Zoran Zaev. We are very honored for having you with us today at this important event. You have the floor. Thank you.
Благодарам многу. Почитувана постојана представнички на Undp, драга Нарине Сахакјан, почитувани амбасадори, заменици амбасадори, представници на амбасадите на сите пријателски земји кои што сте денеска со нас, почитувани градоначалници, директори, предприемачи кои што ве гледам денеска овде сите присутни, почитувана госпоѓо Мирјана Сполјарич-Егер, почитуван господине Штайнер. Навистина ми представува задоволство што учествувам на еден ваков настан, затоа што е голема честа, а секако и задоволството, прво и да се обратите на една ваква конференција, со која отвараме акселераторската лабораторија, која канцеларијата на UNDP ја основа во земјата кон крајот на 2020 година, со цел да се приклучи на најбрзата и на најголемата светска мрежа за учење, за предизвиците и за остварување на целите за одржлив развој на Обединетите нации. Забрзувањето на темпото со кое ги решаваме предизвиците на патот до постигнување на целите за одржлив развој е клучно за нивна реализација до 2030 година. Затоа ми представува огромно задоволство што UNDP, како наш постојан партнер, инвестира во овој процес на учење и иновирање во развојната пракса, од што корист има и нашата земја. Новата акселераторска лабораторија ќе отвори можности за партнерства на иновативни развојни проекти за учење од најуспешните развојни практики ширум светот. Овде сакам да потсетам дека со Израел, например, имаме одлично партнерство и искуство на полето на иновациите и стартап компаниите. Некои од водечките имиња во македонскиот еко-стартап систем беа тренирани токму во Израел. Најголемиот хекатон во Битола го организираше Израел и беа присутни многу млади и надежни луѓе. Ова го кажувам затоа што денеска со нас е и господинот Сингер, кој што го познаваме по сите по книгата за објавувањето на успешните приказни од Израел, кои што се реалност и двигател на ова наша пријателска земја. Почитувани, станува збор за исклучително важна тема која владата ќе ја следи со особено внимание, затоа што придобивките од неа задираат во најдлабоките фундаменти на градењето на современата македонска економија, со посебен аспект на нејзиното интернационализирање, како и во политиките за справување со последиците кои се настанаа со планетарната криза со COVID-19. Како влада, ги користевме искуствата на домашни, но и странски експерти во градење на сите 5 економски пакети преку кои креативно го стимулираме економското ниво и притискаме за дополнително креативен инпут во надминувањето на проблемите и пречките. Како пример сакам да потенцирам дека ова е исклучителна можност за целата бизнис заедница, за сите микро и макро чинители да ги искористат потенцијалите и искуствата на акселераторската лабораторија на UNDP за трансформативна промена. Истовремено ги повикувам заедно да работиме на дизајнирање на стратешки документи од лабораторијата, кои потоа сите засегнати страни ќе ги преточат во јасна и децидна имплементација за економско рестартирање на економските двигатели по пост-ковид периодот и за остварување секако на 17 меѓусебно поврзани и амбициозни цели за развој од агендата 2030. Сакам да истакнам дека како дел од стратегиите на оваа влада и нејзините институции, за прв пат имаме така наречен Национален стартап совет, кој прави краткорочна и долгорочна стратегија за трансформација на македонскиот стартап екосистем. Фондот за иновации и технолошки развој е сериозно посветен на овие цели, но и на креирање на инвестициски фонд со кој сериозно ќе се подобрат моделите на финансирање на микро и почетните бизниси. Едноставно кажано, посветени сме и работиме со сите сили да ја трансформираме Северна Македонија како нов регионален центар на иновации. Во пост-ковид ерата, која е пред нас, час поскоро треба да ги впрегнеме сите алатки, како што и акцелераторската лабораторија, во изнаоѓање на иновативни решенија кои за сите нас ќе создадат економски патеки, кои се пред се зелени, инклузивни и праведни. Една од најважните лекции кои ги научивме во целиот овој кризен период е дека добрите решенија доаѓаат преку диалог, вмреженост, отворена мисла, критички став и капацитет за адаптација. Затоа, во соработка со Undp и со поддршката на владата на Велика Британија, започнуваме отворен и инклузивен процес за впишување на националната развојна стратегија за следните 20 години. Само преку вклучување на целото општество во националните развојни процеси можеме да се осигураме дека ќе стигнеме до најдобрите решенија и дека никој нема да биде запоставен. Ќе продолжиме во истата ова насока заедно со нашите стратешки партнери да градиме пријателства, да разменуваме искуства, а со тоа да градиме зелена, просперитетна бизнис иднина за сите наши граѓани. Посакувам успех и сметајте на целосна поддршка на владата. Ви благодарам.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and allow me again to thank you for being with us today and for all the support to the continued and strategic partnership between North Macedonia and Undp. And since I have the floor, allow me also to thank our strategic partners and core investors in the Accelerator Lab program network, Germany and Qatar, who have invested and enabled Undp to launch this fast and wide global learning network on sustainable development. With this, we have just concluded the opening session of today's event, and I'm pleased to hand back the floor to my colleague Narine. Over to you.
Thank you, Mirjana, and for being today with us. And huge thanks to Administrator Achim Steiner and Prime Minister Zoran Zaev for your presence. It's truly a demonstration of the commitment of UNDP and the government of North Macedonia to explore new frontiers of development to ensure the better life for all. And as Mirjana mentioned, we are concluded our opening session, and we are now proceeding with the first session of today's event, the keynote presentations addressing different aspects of and different experiences of system transformation. In this time of planetary crisis, when the best practices don't exist in many times, and we are more convinced than ever that there is a need for an agile network that can quickly learn what works and what doesn't in tackling sustainable development problems. The world is facing ever-evolving and increasingly complex challenges that can only be addressed through bold and wide-reaching changes in the system that supports our societies. This process of system transformation is not simple or not easy. Fortunately for us, we can learn how to walk this way from the pioneers that were there before us, leading the charge of transforming systems. To help inspire us and expand our horizons, we are honored to have 3 keynote speakers with a depth of experience on what system transformation actually looks like in different countries, different organizations, and in different contexts. To introduce our first keynote speaker, I will start by asking some of the questions that he had to write a book to answer. How is that Israel, a country of 7.1 million, only 60 years old, surrounded with enemies almost on all borders, in a state of war since the founding, with almost no natural resources, produces more startup companies than large and stable countries like UK, Canada, Japan, China, India, Korea, and even more, how Israel has per capita managed to attract twice over venture capital investments as the US and 30 times more than Europe. Saul Singer, the man who wrote the book on this, is our first keynote speaker. To write his book, Startup Nation, the story of Israel's economic miracle, Mr. Singer and with the co-author, Dan Senior, interviewed over 100 people. Among them were leading venture capitalists from the companies like Google, Intel, Cisco, as well as historians, US military leaders, and Israeli heads of state. And their conclusion was, while Israel has much to learn from the world has much to learn from Israel. And indeed, I have no doubt that this keynote presentation will be an excellent learning experience. And I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Saul Singer, best-selling author and former editorial page editor at Jerusalem Post. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Singer. Mr. Singer, floor is yours.
It's very good to be with you, at least virtually. I do hope I will be able to visit North Macedonia sometime after the world becomes more normal again. I think actually that North Macedonia and Israel do have some things in common. We're both small countries. We're not far from each other. I'm speaking to you from Jerusalem. And I would be able to get to you, I think, in just a few hours from here. So I am eager to visit. So I'll say something about how we became Startup Nation. Basically, and this is another thing I think we have in common, is that Israel itself is a startup. It started as an idea. We're about 72 years old. It took you could say 2,000 years to make this idea a reality. It also took a lot of drive and determination and a willingness to take risk. And that's what it takes to do startups. I think the fact that we're a country of immigrants is another big factor. Immigrants are natural entrepreneurs because they were willing to take a risk. They were determined, and you see that immigrants all over the world are often entrepreneurs. In terms of the last 10 years since the book came out, I think a lot of people asked me, is this sustainable? Can Israel continue to produce so many startups? And in fact, it's only increased. Our system has actually gotten bigger and stronger. I think one of the most important things is over time, we're producing more serial entrepreneurs, people who've done this 2 or 3 times before, who have actually more ambition, more experience, more ability to succeed. And that's very exciting. In fact, we have something like 40 unicorns here now, meaning startups that are worth over $1 billion. I thought at the beginning of this pandemic that a lot of people were worried that venture capital would dry up. In fact, for Israel, it's been a record year. Our companies have raised $10 billion over 2020, and evenly in every quarter. So it was as if COVID didn't exist, which was really quite remarkable. But it shows what the opportunity that we all have. And I think that, as terrible as this pandemic has been, there are opportunities for innovation. We're seeing the realm of digital health just take a tremendous leap forward. Of course, we're all learning to work remotely. There's all kinds of changes that have gone on that are also opportunities for innovation. But I think I'd like to point out something else about innovation that people don't always think about. we tend to think about startups when we think of innovation. But what's happening now is around the world, countries like North Macedonia, all over the world, I traveled a lot before the pandemic, speaking in many countries, and I saw startups everywhere. I saw them in Vietnam, in Kenya, in Sao Paulo, and of course in China and India and Europe. 10 years ago, it used to be basically Silicon Valley and Israel, and now everyone's getting in the game, and that's a wonderful thing. But what it also means is that startups are not enough anymore, and there's an opportunity for countries as a whole to become innovative even outside of their startup ecosystems. I think that I heard that North Macedonia is looking at countries like Estonia, which have had a reputation for being innovative. They're doing a lot with e-government and so on. So that's a good example of a country that is innovating on the national level. That, e-government is not technologically difficult. The question is which countries adopt it. We have a certain amount here. In South Korea, they're good at it. The UK has made some big steps forward. This kind of innovation is available to every country. The question is which one adopts it. And right now, I have to mention a very exciting opportunity, I think, that North Macedonia has to solve two problems: the COVID-19 pandemic and putting North Macedonia on the map, on the global map of innovation. And the way that this can be done is that just within the last week, an Israeli company has announced a new FDA-approved test for COVID-19. Now imagine that you could test, that anybody at home with just their phone could test themselves every day for free with their phone. And the way that this works is through voice. It turns out that COVID-19 can be detected through your voice by simply counting from 50 to 70. It takes half a minute. You get your results in a minute. And this voice detection method can catch 8 out of 10 cases. So think of it like a vacuum cleaner. Think of the million people of Macedonia and think of everyone taking a simple voice test, and 8 out of 10 cases of corona are caught very quickly. If you had a national campaign to do this, you would be the first country in the world to eliminate COVID using a new digital technology, not the methods that we used over the last, that are really a century old, things like social distancing and masks and even vaccines. These are not new. These are not really innovations, though. The vaccine is a new kind of vaccine. No one has used a really new tool to do this. And so what you could do is announce a national campaign of voice screening, and anyone who is shown to be positive can take a quick, either a rapid test or a PCR test to confirm the results. But I think that this could be a way for countries in general to eliminate corona even without a vaccine. And again, the question is, which country is going to be the first? And I think North Macedonia has an opportunity to leverage the fact that it's a small country. That can be an advantage. It's something that for Israel has been an advantage. It's an advantage that kind of everybody knows each other. You can easily get to all the scientists and companies and political leaders, whatever you want, within a phone call or an email. So I really think that countries like North Macedonia have an opportunity that large countries don't have. And that there's a way to kind of leapfrog other countries in terms of innovation and ecosystems. Yes, you should build your startup ecosystem. You can do that and it's going to happen. But if you're able to innovate on a national level in this way, you will become, you will have a reputation as one of the most innovative countries in the world, and people will want to work with you. People will want to create startups in a country with this reputation. So, you know, I think this is a great opportunity. And I think it's not just in digital health, in many areas, in education, in transportation, in e-government. There are many areas where there are opportunities to be one of the first countries to adopt innovation. Producing innovation is one thing, adopting it is another. And the adopting part is often the hard part because it involves changing the way we think. It involves changing the way we act. Humans are harder to change than technology. And technology is available everywhere. The question is who's going to use it, who's going to adopt it. So I'm really happy to take, I understand that there'll be a question or two from the audience. I'm happy to take that and to maybe add some thoughts in my answer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being with us today and sharing the inspirational story of Israel's economic miracle, and also amazing example and the news you shared with us referring to the voice-based testing. I mean, Israel is not stopping to astonish the world with the innovation. So, I mean, we had many questions, but my colleagues choose one, and I will read now. And we don't have a lot of time, so probably a couple of minutes to respond on this question. In your book, you mentioned that one of the major success factors of becoming a startup nation is the non-hierarchical environment where creativity and intelligence are highly valued. How much do you believe in replicability of the approach in other countries, and what will be the major supporting factors for that?
Yeah, so let me start with the fact that I believe that every country has its own innovation story. Startup Nation, the book, was Israel's innovation story, and every country has its own based on its own culture, its own history, because our strengths are in our culture and our history. And the way to innovate is to build on our strengths and to work with other countries that have different strengths. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, not so much to be like Israel, but to work with Israel. And we're so close. It's like you have this Silicon Valley on your doorstep. So it would be a great thing for us to work together. But let me say about the hierarchy question, that is a cultural trait that we have, is that we don't have a lot of respect for authority. Even in the military, there's not that much hierarchy. Soldiers call their officers by their first names. Very young soldiers. We have 3 daughters, 2 of them are in the military now. They are in their early 20s, and the amount of responsibility they're given is crazy. And that's deliberate, because the real training we give our young people is by giving them challenges and responsibility at a young age. And that's actually a big part of why we're Startup Nation, because once you've confronted challenges and you realize that you can do things that you thought were impossible, then you're willing and eager to do other impossible things, like doing a startup. So that's part of the answer to why we're Startup Nation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Singer. And really thank you for being with us and generously sharing your wisdom and advice. And we are looking forward even more cooperation with coming days and months with you. Thank you. To introduce our next keynote speaker, I first want to talk about his home country. If asked to envision a digital advanced nation, many of us might rightly think about Estonia. Estonia is a prime example of a country that has successfully transformed into one of the most advanced digital societies in the world. I mean, it's amazing, but I mean, to learn that 99% or even more than 99% of state services, public services are provided online. To share insights from the Estonian experience of digitalization in the public sector, we are honored to have an accomplished keynote speaker who has worn many hats and gained many titles. Mr. Taavi Kotka, the former Chief Information Officer of the Estonian government, who led the country's e-residency program, the former CEO of one of the biggest startups in Baltics, Estonia's Entrepreneur of the Year 2011, and this is not the full list of his credentials. Engineer by heart, by education, by hobby, and by job. This is how he usually wants to introduce himself. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Taavi Kotka.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
I hope so. So, yeah, that was great words, and thank you for having me today. Even though I understand Estonians are not very popular at the moment among North Macedonians after yesterday's basketball game, so which led us to the European Championship, and you sadly had to be left behind, was to say so. So I was asked to share like the vision or the way how Estonia achieved the e-nation position, and what is the story behind e-Estonia, and what it takes to build a truly digital society. Yes, there were mentioned many good words about the services, what the government has been building, but I think even more important is that what we have achieved as a society. Because like building digital society, it's not the government job. Like no government can do that. It has to be a joint effort between the private and public sector, and the private sector needs to lead the way. Like that's like how it should start, and how we should do it. And we in Estonia, we started like 20 years ago, even more. And like after breaking apart from Soviet Union, like for us it was very clear that we wanted to differentiate ourselves, what was so-called old Soviet Union and what is the new Estonia. And one of the key things like we wanted to accomplish is to get rid of any kind of corruption. I mean, if everything is digitalized, if it means like everything is transparent, and if everything is transparent, I mean, there is no like much room for corruption. So our previous president, he liked to say that it's impossible to bribe a computer. And so that's why, like, that was like one of the reasons, like, why we want to become digital. We wanted to have this like Western style country. But the second, even more important reason for Estonia to become digital was the fact that Estonia is small, like people-wise, it's only 1.3 million people, but we are a huge country land-wise. So land-wise, we are bigger than Netherlands or Belgium or Switzerland, which means that we have many, actually we had many small towns, villages, and economically, let's say it's unreasonable to keep, let's say, a bank office in a small town or a telecom office. So the private sector started to look for possibilities how to push people towards self-service. So instead of having a government officer or a clerk in in an office physically, let's push people to do self-service. But if you start think about it, like if people do self-services, the obvious question is like, how can I be sure that behind the computer is actually exactly that person? Let's say, how can you be sure that it's Kotka who speaks in front of you? Okay, you can see me now, but back then in 1990s, the internet speed was low as hell, so so you can't do that. Like so in many ways, we understood as a society that, for example, a problem, how to be sure who is behind the computer, needs to be solved together between private sector and government sector. So yes, private sector can provide technology, but somehow, I mean, there has to be a company or an institution who is credited enough, like, to issue identity. And for us, it was Estonian police. So even though the tools how to build like digital identity for the people, they were provided by the private sector, like it was government institution who actually started to give it out, like to the people, to the nation. But why I do this example is exactly like the attitude or the mindset, what you need to have to build digital society. That's the problem of the Europe at the moment, and not only Europe, but also problem of US or Canada or Australia. That like we all understand that companies need to become digital, and we understand the government should become digital. But if we ask from ourselves, like does the society needs to become digital, then in many cases we hear the answer yes. Obviously, they should become digital, but let's say I've had this question many times in Switzerland, but if you ask why, no one can explain. I mean, life in Switzerland, for example, life is good. I mean, if you compare the average salaries, in your country with Switzerland, like there's a huge difference. Like life is convenient, trains are arriving and leaving on time, like great places to have vacation, etc. So why to be digital? Why the society needs to be digital? And you actually, I mean, if you haven't experienced a totally digital society, you don't actually know what you miss. So it's like I mean, how you know that it's good to drive with a car if you haven't felt the power of the wheel. So and that's what many like European and Western countries are lacking at the moment. So they can't understand that if the private sector and government sector are not working in silos, even inside the government, if they're not working in silos but they're exchanging information and trying to solve complicated problems together, that leads to the situation where country actually benefits and can create more wealth to their own people. So great examples are, let's say, China, which I think is even more digitally advanced than Estonia today. Yeah, I might not like their like government model, but from the IT perspective, they're very advanced. India, I mean, they have there is still corruption in India, but it was even worse. So many of those things were improved thanks to digitalization. Plus, they have so many people. It's like the other way around. It's hard to govern like so many people. Like, but they have found models now how to do it together with the private sector. And I mean, money moves faster in India than in Europe, for example, from account to account. So, like building the society together, it's like one of the key challenges. So it cannot be that, let's say you have like elite engineers in North Macedonia, or like you have telecom people, you have finance institutions, and they will say that, oh, government, you should do something. No, I mean, like the big players in the private sector should lead the way, and the government should follow and support. For example, like, do you know in how many times per year a person interacts with the government in average? I can't hear you, but it's 2.6 times per year. if you don't include healthcare and education. So 2.6 times, and like one of these 2.6 is taxes. So how often you change your driving license? How often you apply for a construction permit? Maybe like 1 or 2 times per your lifetime. So there is no such thing like customer experience or so it's not like you are applying for, let's say, a construction permit and you say, oh, I still remember how I did it 10 years ago. Or like if I apply for a driving license and, oh yeah, I know how to do it. So government services are not services that you use every day. So it's basically impossible dream to believe that government is able or capable to build tools that are super convenient, easy to understand, self-explanatory, etc. They are not. So those tools that you use in the government, they have to be very similar with the tools that people use in everyday life. That's why it's very important that the way, for example, how people log into the different portals, or like how they do digital signature, or how they digital sign, they have to be the same tools what they use in private sector. I mean, with your finances, you are dealing with every week, at least. Maybe not telecom, but like if you want to build a truly combined digital society, it means that everybody has to be on board and have to agree that there are like certain core elements, certain core components that need to be built together, but even more important, need to be implemented together. In Estonia, for example, we started to issue digital identities to the people. It's a mandatory document. We started to issue them in year 2002. So every Estonian, starting from the age of 15, had to have, by law, a digital identity. Something that, that's a passport was voluntary. You don't have to passport. You don't have to have passport, but you have to have digital identity. That was like when we started 2002. But banks didn't support digital identity. The government issued digital identity first like 4 or 5 years. Like, what do you think? What was the usage rate of the digital identity? Flat and almost zero. And the moment the bank started to support it, rocket. So hockey stick. And it was a great example to show that you can't create stuff without private sector, fully supporting the innovation that was actually started together, but somehow banks thought that it might be a business that the authentication might be a business that they want to themselves. Or if you think about the normal services, for example, automated tax declarations, or let's say there's a COVID time exchange of medical information between different hospitals, etc. This means that there needs to be ready-made or pre-agreed protocols, like how to exchange data between systems securely. I mean, first of all, among the silos inside the government, let's say from one ministry to another ministry, or let's say if a tax declaration that the bank sends information to a tax declaration, so the information is pulled from different systems altogether. You have to have those agreements, and if you have agreements between private and government sector, basically start to automate everything. So that's why I'm saying, that's why I'm so proud about Estonia, that we have been automating not only the government services, but also anyway, the private sector, obviously they did their part first, then the government followed, but now we also have done all the symbiosis or connections between the private and government sectors. So it doesn't matter if the hospital is a private sector hospital or government hospital, they still exchange data. Or if it's a private school or government school, they still exchange the data. And me as a parent, I can easily see how my child is doing at school and what needs to be studied for the next day, etc. So it basically, we have reached in a situation where there is an expectation among the society to see that, this information needs to be reachable in a digital way. So there's no paper moving between silos anymore. So more than 95% of government transactions are machine to machine. So there's no human in between. And why it's also important is that if you get data moving and if you get everything digital in your society, you have loads of data appearing in different locations. If you have silos and everybody collects their own data, the data will be rotten quite soon. I mean, let's say like your driving license had one address, but you changed the address in meanwhile. In the population registry, you have different address. The data, if the same data is kept in multiple locations, I mean, it gets rotten. So instead of having like a perfect data lake, you actually have a data swamp that cannot be used for any kind of future prediction models or whatever. So for us, it was very important to also, like, we all understand that you can't break the silos. There are silos in government, there are silos in the companies. Inside companies, you actually can break them, but like inside the government, it's impossible. At least if you have democracy. Like if you have like autocracy, most probably you can break the silos there, but in democratic society, you can't break them. So which means that every silo is a kingdom. Every silo wants to like have their own act and like power and systems, like how they manage their stuff. And when we understood this, that we can't break it, it was clear that we have to declare a system where basically certain information only is stored in one particular location only. So so-called once-only principle. That let's say the Ministry of Environment is a single source of truth of any kind of environmental issues or environmental data, but they can't keep personal data. So the personal data is in a population registry, and population registry belongs to the Ministry of Finance. And if you start think this way, that what we did in Estonia was the same thing what companies did in year 2000, like it used to be that logistics had their own system, CRM had their own system, sales had their third system, accounting has the fourth system, etc. So sometimes you sold something out from a store, you actually didn't know that if it actually exists in the stock or not. Like, so there was a mess in year 2000 plus in the private sector. And then the private sector did the consolidation, meaning that let's agree that the customer data only relays in accounting. And everybody else who needs the customer data needs to do a connection to that single source of truth. And let's say the logistics data is only in the logistics, so nobody else can store logistics data. And if you need that data, that's your single source of truth. And that's how you build like truly decentralized digital society that is also easy to protect. I mean, when we had the cyber war with Russia in 2007, we were under heavy by DDoS and any type of attacks for a month, but we survived, and we survived well because, I mean, if that's like the big ecosystem has been like built in a way that like every data is just a like piece of data here and there, and you can also always combine it together only by having like P2P connections and like direct connections between two systems, and all those systems are built in a different way. It becomes very hard to attack in a massive way. Like it's theoretically possible, but like practically it's very expensive. Like, and that's I think one of the reasons why we survived the cyber war with Russia. But anyways, I mean, like I could like endlessly talk about like how to build this system. We have a book of 7 principles, like 7 principles what you need to put in place together with the private sector to create a digital society. And I mean, if I present this book, it would take like a day here in front of you. But I would like to also remember like why this digitalization is so important, like for the future looking. The fact is that when you have correct data, where you have connections between private and government sector, together you can actually start solving like very complicated issues. For example, 8 years ago, we had a like VAT fraud question. There was a lot of VAT fraud in our ecosystem. And together with the private sector, we agreed that we increase automated reporting from the accounting systems, from their own accounting systems towards tax and custom. It was like a very small change, but basically we killed data fraud, VAT fraud in Estonia. So Estonia, thanks to the digital society, is by OECD rules, we are the best tax collectors in the world. So we spend least money to collect one tax euro. And that's because like our private sector and government institutions, they actually exchange data a lot. And that allows us to do the automate controlling, etc. When you talk about AI or machine learning, the high quality data is needed for that. Let's say, do you know like how your curriculum that you teach to the children of 5th grade actually influences their salaries when they come to the working market? I mean, yes and no, but at least I could try to solve that question because like I can do those connections and I have those relationships between the tables and data. So it's very important, like being digital is not about like good government services or like easy to use government services. That's so yesterday. The digital society is all about the future and like how to predict and do better policy relying on data in your systems. That's all about that. And last but not least, obviously countries are in competition with each other. I mean, we in Estonia here in North could never have such a beautiful weather like that you have in North Macedonia. So we have to compete with you somebody somehow. I mean, like we can't attract so many tourists as you can, like, but maybe we can provide more like automated and flexible business environment that can be fully controlled from distance. So you don't have to be in Estonia to run an Estonian company by yourself, because we have all the tools like digital signatures, like internet votings, everything, like everything's in online. And it has to be like a true pet that people are more and more global. Yes, sadly by COVID now we are more stuck in one place, but like it used to be that people are very, very, very mobile. And but anyway, they don't have to be physically there where they actually virtually act. And that's why Estonia wants to become like the best like business environment, at least in Europe, to provide that service. So in that competition, we want to be better than any country in Europe, which like leads us basically to the Delaware model, but without tax cheating. As you know, what happened? I mean, all the big Fortune 500 companies are incorporated in Delaware in US. So you think that Apple is a Silicon Valley company, but actually it's not. It's incorporated in Delaware. Or Coca-Cola is not in Atlanta; it's actually in Delaware. So that's my point. I mean, like if you want to build a future, like a true future where you want to use those old fancy tools, you have to set the baseline right. But you can set the baseline right only using like building those things together with the private sector. And the private sector needs to be the leader, not only about technology, what to use, but also leader in implementation. Because with the government, like you never can teach or train people to use technologies that you want to promote. So that was my short keynote for you today. Like I understand we all got 20 minutes. So obviously I would like to be there sometimes. Let's see how the future looks like.
Thank you. Thank you, Tavi, for being with us, and I mean, really sharing the exciting experience of Estonia. You touched on many important aspects, I mean, about the data, about the cooperation between public and private sector, about how digitalization can address the corruption or the efficiency of the government services, about competitiveness of the country. So many interesting aspects, and it's really clear there is much Estonian story might teach the rest of the world. So we will be looking forward for the further cooperation with you, and I mean see in which areas we can bring the insights and the solutions from Estonian example. Thank you very much for being with us today. Our third speaker today will be reflecting some of the most pressing global challenges we are facing today, and on the efforts of UNDP and the development partners to support a united response that puts people and planet first. COVID-19 radically shifted our reality. It has flipped everything upside down, revealed the many flaws in global and national systems, and has changed our world permanently. This time, disruption, however, also opened a myriad of opportunities to rethink how we work, how we govern, how we live, and also how we do development. One important question we should try to get the answer is about the capability of existing systems to see and understand themselves good enough in a world where the future will be different. Please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Mr. Abdullah Mardai, the UN Special Coordinator for Development in Sahel. Mar is a macroeconomist and development expert with strong leadership experience in managing complex development portfolios over the last 35 years. He held various high-level positions within the UN and UNDP and with the government of Senegal prior to joining UN system. All these are facts from his rich biography, but if you will ask his colleagues in UN and UNDP, first thing you will hear that he is a philosopher, he is an inspiration for us, and he puts his heart in development. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Abdullah Mardai. Mar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nareen. I hope you see me well and hear me well. Dear friends, I am pleased to attend this launching event of the Accelerator Lab in the Republic of North Macedonia. Let me first recognize and salute North Macedonia for being a pioneer in national innovation systems. The country itself is an innovation and accelerator lab with a unique ecosystem of academia, industries, and government interfacing in a most inspiring choreography. The Global Innovation Index 2020 shows that relative to GDP, North Macedonia performs above its expected level of development. Friend, this is highly commendable, and I wanted to state it. I'm also happy that we have Estonia with us. Estonia has been ranked the best country in the world for digital life, as per the 2020 Internations report. And you have heard the excellent presentation by Tevi, and you have a taste of what the country Estonia is doing. Friends, it is true that the COVID-19 pandemic has exercised a tectonic shock on our economies and societies. But shocks, to paraphrase Achim Steiner, shocks on our systems are also to be seized as opportunities to size up the resilience of our systems and to detect the pressure points for further and fuller systems transformation. Our topic of today, system transformation, is something that is highly needed. They are the fastest and more efficient ways for sustainable positive change. They not only guide us in building stronger resilience in our systems, but they also help us identify new growth opportunities. And friends, this axiom is true for business, it is true for government, and it is true for societies at large. UNDP has been privileged to be asked by the UN Secretary General to be the technical lead in steering the design and implementation of the UN socio-economic response to the COVID pandemic. We in UNDP realized from the very outset after conducting some 35 plus country COVID socioeconomic impact assessment, that business as usual would not get us out of the grooves, and that we needed to be guided by a practical approach of systems transformation to steer the UN system. All the more so, our projections were showing a very, very disturbing picture. First, the trends are pointing towards a 6-year regression of human development worldwide, and you have seen our latest report is showing it. And this is quite scary. And second, under a high, what we call a high damage scenario, we found that severe long-term effect of the COVID pandemic could push an additional 200 million people into extreme poverty on top of the current pandemic trajectory, bringing the total number of poor about 1 billion by 2030. Again, a very scary projection. The socioeconomic impact assessments, which were, we can call it in the Accelerator Labs vocabulary, a sense-making exercise. And that sense-making exercise did reveal to us a powerful algorithm for systems transformations. And I would call it, for the sake of our discussion today, an algorithm with 9 transformative powers. What are those 9 transformative powers? Power number 1, and we discussed it earlier in the earlier presentation, is what I would call the power of unorthodoxy, or the power of collective action, as Trevi put it forward. The biggest insight we got is about cultivating and creating bold choices and creative options. We are too often locked into solutions and certainty, which often feel heavy and inflexible. A classical model is, if you want X, then you need to do Y. We found that classical and orthodox prescriptive model is totally ineffective. We have learned that the best policy responses are those that emanate from co-creation of policy options through collective action by multiple stakeholders, which is in sum the spirit of the Accelerator Labs that Undp has been prompting in now some 90 countries around the world. Power number 2 that we learn is the power of thought experimentation. We have seen in COVID responses that many countries made a fairly radical departure from their traditional policy choices with incomplete information. If we are to be relevant in a fast-changing context, we need to develop options which are necessarily multifaceted and think through considerations with a credible evidence base that minimize perceived trade-offs. We have learned that a thought experimentation space that combines cutting-edge data modeling and simulation to help decision makers generate options that are evidence-based in real time is an absolute must. This is what Undp COVID Data Future Platform that we are building now, which is very operative, and we can share it with you. And this is that space of experimentation that we are offering to the world. Power number 3 is what I would call the power of integrative thinking. We have seen, looking at country responses, that no singular parameter would by itself have significant impact. And that to have an optimal sustainable path for recovery, one would need a cluster of policy options around inclusive governance, green recovery, digital infrastructure, and social protection. And we see that this is the line that countries like Estonia and North Macedonia are taking, and I would like to recognize that. Power number 4 is what I will call the power of boldness. You can see it in the literature. It is also called the power to bend reality and solve problems far bigger than ourselves. We now have strong evidence that bold choices are needed, and they really start to pay dividends with a significant time lag. That means that bold, courageous policy choices today don't transform anything overnight. It may take time. So the appetite for fixation, for quick wins, may just be an illusion. But being bold with a sense of innovation can make it speedier. And for me, this is the surefire currency to bend reality. I was positively mystified to hear Soul Singer's proposal. He just offered a bold idea, which is COVID voice-based testing. I think this is the bold idea you need if you want to bend the curve extremely fast. Power number 5 is the power of trust. This entails a shift in values and a radical transformation of social norms. This is why each of us matters. Our choices matter. Reconnecting to our source matters fundamentally, because the transformations needed will be difficult, uncomfortable for some, and do not happen overnight. In our current civilization of instantaneity, in a world where we don't have more than 3 seconds of patience, a world where Amazon can bring just about anything to your door in less than 3 clicks, we need to be real about what it would take to live in equality and peace with each other and with our planet. You can't tell a person with 300 pounds overweight that a strict diet and exercise regime will feel easy, or that they will be happy every day. No, they will need to be trust in the process. They will need to be trust in the system, and willingness to sacrifice short-term happiness for a richer and more fulfilling life. So this power of trust for me is at the heart of transformation. Power number 6 is the power of shifting from problem thinking to solution thinking. I think if I were going to say that what is the biggest imprint of Achim Steiner's leadership in UNDP is the change of way of doing. We always focus, this is the way we are organically built. Where is the problem? And his line is, what is the solution? I think this is extremely powerful. But this fundamentally requires humility and curiosity, a willingness to ask provocative questions we don't have the answers to. And I see our UNDP integration work as supporting that process and holding space for transformation. Power number 7 is the power to embrace risks. We must also recognize that we are confronting a new generation of risks, all tied in some way to planetary pressures. COVID-19 is an illustration, and so is climate change. When we look at the drivers, the roots are the same, and they're linked to planetary pressures. And because these pressures are and will remain high for some time, we may be in for a period of more volatility and shocks than we have been used to see. Especially because when these risks materialize in shocks, they exacerbate inequalities, which compound social and political instability. So risk will be there. We have to build them into our system and make them our friends so that we can beat them or build on them. Power number 8 is what I will call the power of nature. And in less prosaic term, it is called in the literature, and like it, the Anthropocene is fighting back. The drivers of planetary pressures, energy and material use are structurally linked to our industrial societies. So the transformation of the magnitude that separates agriculture from industrial societies is what is likely at stake here. Much of the debate on transformation is narrowly focused on the energy challenge, with much less attention paid to material flows, land use change, biodiversity pressure. COVID is just another symptoms that the planet is fighting back. It is the revenge of Gaia. Systems transformations will also mean a reconciliation with nature. This is what Antonio Guterres is putting forward, saying that the next coming years should be the years where we, the human, we, the people, are reconciling with nature. We need to build this new social contract between people and the nature. Last but not least, power number 9, which I would call the power of collective brain, or rather, science does matter. The challenge of transformation is not likely to be achieved if human aspirations are not harnessed for transformative change. Much of the debate on sustainability sounds like a pious retreat to sustaining needs or reducing consumption. It is key to invest in science, in innovations, in education, not only as a productivity enhancers, but as the underlying drivers of transformation. And from that perspective, more people are likely to have a more powerful collective brain that can take us forward. So power number 9, the power of the collective brain, for me, is extremely important. Dear friends, as you can see, systems transformations is not a quick fix. It calls for a shift of mind and a shift of behavior from ego to eco. It calls for enlightened and sustained leadership. It is like running a marathon with a mindset of a sprinter and the wisdom of a monk. And above all, and here I fully agree with soul singer and Dan Seno, it calls for the need to flatten hierarchy and elevate informality, all backed by government policies focused on innovation. And here I want to add on science too. This is the system transformation doctrine, my friends, that UNDP is championing. This is the road that countries like Singapore, South Korea, and Israel took. And I see North Macedonia on the same path. I thank you. Over to you, Naveen.
Thank you very much, Mar, for a great speech and for inspiring us. I mean, you generously shared your wisdom, and I think, I will probably repeat one of the last points, that system transformation is not easy and it's not quick, and it requires a lot of efforts and the mindset change. So that's really crucial to ensure the system transformation. But what you managed to share with us, the 9 powers, it looked like a very clear pathway or the roadmap for the countries to succeed with the system transformation. Thank you very much for being with us, even, not being anymore with the UNDP, but your heart with us. Thank you. Dear colleagues, we are receiving a lot of questions, but I'm afraid, unfortunately, because of the time limit, we will not be able to open up for the questions, because we still have a very exciting panel to go. So I will conclude now our session here, and on behalf of UNDP, again express our immense gratitude to our amazing keynote speakers for sparing the time to join us today. I hope that their stories provided some food for thought and inspired you to think big what sustainable development can achieve with the system transformation. And allow me to conclude with the words of the great philosopher Socrates: the secret of change is to focus all our energy, not to fight the old, but on building the new. And I also just learned that we are having more than 300 people virtually with us. And I'm really very happy we are managing to capitalize with these new opportunities digitalization is giving and COVID crisis created. So, I mean, please stay with us because we are going to have very interesting, exciting panel discussion where we will have the local champions sharing with us their own stories with system transformation. And we will have a 5-minute break and we will set up the stage. But by then you will have an opportunity to look on the interesting video on our Acceleration Lab Global Network. Thank you. Thank you to all our key speakers.
60 lab teams covering 78 countries are now up and running in UNDP offices, doing development differently. We accelerate learning by creating actionable intelligence and testing solutions. We strengthen capabilities by supporting decision makers to explore, experiment, and grow portfolios. We adapt to change by expanding the way UNDP invests, thinks about, and delivers development. We look for what's next by scanning the horizon. The network is comprised of fast and curious labbers. 72% are brand new to the UN system. 24% are returning to their home countries to solve development challenges. 63% have experience in ethnographic research. Our award-winning teams are helping UNDP reimagine sustainable development for the 21st century. In this time of planetary crisis, when best practices don't always exist, we need to learn what works and what doesn't for sustainable development problems in a matter of weeks, not years. That's what this agile network is about. When COVID-19 hit, governments had limited information, no blueprints, but had opportunities to work with people innovating to stop the spread of the virus. The Accelerator Labs have powered UNDP for fast action. UNDP Sudan identified insights about behavioral patterns such as panic buying and stockpiling.
The most exciting part of our project is that we designed it and we did the data collection in just under 2 days.
UNDP Ethiopia used foresight to imagine how COVID-19 will impact industrial parks.
Here in Ethiopia, we used foresight to understand how the newly developed industrial parks would be affected by the pandemic.
UNDP Philippines used real-time data visualization to help assess the impact of the pandemic on excluded citizens.
In the Philippines, we used messenger chatbots and other digital tools in tandem with community organizing to give the vulnerable a greater voice in the assessment of the socio-economic impacts of COVID-19.
UNDP Argentina helped design financial solutions for small entrepreneurs impacted by the crisis.
Pay in Advance is a social media campaign from the Argentine Accelerator Lab. It encouraged consumers to pay in advance goods and services so they can get them after the lockdown ends.
The way Accelerator Labs apply cutting-edge behavioral insights, support real-time data, and create future-proof policy advice is becoming an integral part of UNDP's contribution to the UN-wide response to COVID-19 and its economic legacy. Looking towards the future, the world's largest network of labs is growing and looking for partnerships with governments, businesses, and academia. Join us. UNDP set out to build the world's largest and fastest learning network on sustainable development challenges. In less than a year, we did just that. 60 lab teams covering 78 countries are now up and running in UNDP offices, doing development differently. We accelerate learning by creating actionable intelligence and testing solutions. We strengthen capabilities by supporting decision makers to explore, experiment, and grow portfolios. We adapt to change by expanding the way UNDP invests, thinks about, and delivers development. We look for what's next by scanning the horizon. The network is comprised of fast and curious labbers. 72% are brand new to the UN system. 24% are returning to their home countries to solve development challenges. 63% have experience in ethnographic research. Our award-winning teams are helping UNDP reimagine sustainable development for the 21st century. In this time of planetary crisis, when best practices don't always exist, we need to learn what works and what doesn't for sustainable development problems in a matter of weeks, not years. That's what this agile network is about. When COVID-19 hit, governments had limited information, no blueprints, but had opportunities to work with people innovating to stop the spread of the virus. The Accelerator labs have powered UNDP for fast action. UNDP Sudan identified insights about behavioral patterns such as panic buying and stockpiling.
The most exciting part of our project is that we designed it and we did the data collection in just under 2 days.
UNDP Ethiopia used foresight to imagine how COVID-19 will impact industrial parks.
Here in Ethiopia, we used foresight to understand how the newly developed industrial parks would be affected by the pandemic.
UNDP Philippines used real-time data visualization to help assess the impact of the pandemic on excluded citizens.
In the Philippines, we used messenger chatbots and other digital tools in tandem with community organizing to give the vulnerable a greater voice in the assessment of the socio-economic impacts of COVID-19.
UNDP Argentina helped design financial solutions for small entrepreneurs impacted by the crisis.
Pay in Advance is a social media campaign from the Argentine Accelerator Lab. It encourages